Just want to welcome everybody. Welcome to Paul, Nate, Rafe, and Graham. This is the first of maybe a few post-Estuary Northwest Conference conversations, and I'd like to welcome everyone that's watching. So I'm not going to do introductions because, well, we'll just get right to it. So I just wanted to start by just asking you, now that we've had like a couple weeks post-conference, what was it like for you? What stands out? And what seems to be the thing that's sticking? Paul, I'll end with Paul because Paul's already been talking about this. I'll start with Graham, and we'll go with Rafe next.
All right. My overall, well, first of all, hi guys. It's really nice to see your faces. My overall feeling has been, and I think a lot of people are saying this is, something with a capital S happened with a capital H, and I don't know what it was, and I don't know what to do about it. Yeah, and I'm kind of reeling. So, Paul, you talked about mountaintop experiences. I was talking to Chad, the alcoholic, this morning, which that in and of itself, like talking live with this dude I've never talked to before. I know a lot of people love him, know him, followed his work before the conference. I met him for the first time there. And like, he's a wonderful human being. And we were talking this morning, and it's so good to hear his voice. And the analogy that came to mind for me was of Moses smashing the tablets. It's like something happened, and a record of the something was written with the hand of God. It's like a direct encounter. And then he came down, and kind of sort of like a reversion to normalcy was going on, which enraged Moses, and he smashed it all. And then he had to rewrite it, but in his own hand, not in the hand of God. And I have no rage about the conference. It's more like I have weeping about it being over, but it's like this return to normalcy is really bewildering. And like whatever it was that was written with the hand of God, it's like I got to write it with my own hand now, and that's difficult. I would say, so that's an overall feeling. The image that keeps coming to my mind is, this was a conference, and there was a lot of talking, which is what conferences are for. You come together and not just stare at each other, but talk. I probably did and listened to more talking than I would normally do, in those couple of days than I would normally do in a couple of months. I mean, it was just like this surge of talk, which was wonderful. I loved it all. It was difficult for me. I'm quiet. I prefer to just be in the woods and listen to the trees. I loved it all, and I really cherish the estuary sessions with Group 7. Group 7, I love you guys. I miss you. But the image that keeps coming back to me as I think about the conference is from, and this has been helpful for me, is as like this ray of sunshine amidst all this talking. Rafe taking us outside to get barefoot in the grass, and move around like monkeys is the impression I got. He kept talking about, we took off our shoes and we were barefoot in the grass, and these are a bunch of internet nerds, right? We're talking. We're all barefoot, leaping around in the grass and like moving our arms like this. And I kept thinking, it was so joyful. and didn't involve talking. And it was like a bunch of joyful primates swinging through this like invisible Dreamtime forest in the air. And so that's the image that's burned in my mind. And when I get sad and confused, I just try to like go like this outside barefoot. So thanks, Rafe.
Thanks, Graham.
Did you guys hear any of that? I feel like my internet was going in and out.
A bit.
Yeah, I bet.
The recording is set up to make that a little bit smoother for the audience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. It'll be interesting to go back and listen to it.
It was a great story.
Yeah. What was it?
What kind of has stuck with you since the conference? I know you do a lot of events and stuff, Rafe, so it'd be interesting to hear what, if anything, was different or for you.
It's hard to say for me, to be honest, because I'm just kind of at the end of the season of all the events that I do. And then, as I shared at the conference, my wife and I split for 4 months, and we've been healing our relationship, and that's been really incredibly beautiful, but it's also been like a lot of energy output. I've just kind of went into a deep depressive episode as soon as the conference was over. And then my wife's dad passed away last week, which was expected. But so I've been solo parenting for a few days, and we knew that was going to come, but that's also just kind of like that's the background tenor of what's been going on in my life. So it's hard to kind of like wrestle with what had happened because I just was mostly just staring at the wall and waiting for my energy systems to replenish. But I think what was interesting about it was the mixing of I think a lot about this idea that how do we generate wisdom, or how do we generate knowledge? And one way that we do it is we have a top-down system, right? We are a one-to-many. And so that's represented by the people who stand up on top of stage and talk, or panelists, small group to many. And of course, in the world of the internet, we have way more power, right? Like you think about somebody like Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke. These are college professors who used to lecture to 400 people who now lecture to 9 million people in Jordan's case. And that's amazing, like that we can all get access to a Jordan Peterson. But at the same time, like as a teacher, I know that I can only give so much this direction, and that for a community to actually generate wisdom, that's not sufficient. So there has to be, I think, bottom up feedback loops. And I think there's a real huge problem for someone like Jordan, who has 9 million, is how to filter the bottom up dynamic so he gets a virtuous and clear signal, because the noise is just overwhelming. But you have a bottom up, so the teacher, and doing something in person is also huge, right? Like how, like to feel the energy in the room as you tell the story versus putting it out on the internet and hoping that it lands, right? Like as teachers, being in that kind of space all the time, I think is really, really valuable. And then there's the peer-to-peer dynamic. And this is something that we think about a lot, which is that, we love to think we live in this democratic, egalitarian world and that we're all really equal, but like actually our world is extremely hierarchical, is always hierarchical, is actually in many ways far more hierarchical than it was traditionally, simply because there's more people and more scales available. So we have an inherent tendency to worship the king figure, to worship the sage figure. And that kind of worship, I think, is actually like really a dangerous source of delusion for whomever steps into that role, right? And I think, Paul, you've talked about the idea that like Jordan became the internet's dad. and having the projection. I was talking to one of the participants there about that her dad left when she was a tiny baby. She was a super angry leftist. She discovered Jordan, and then he became dad, right? But like, I've had people who've projected dad onto me, and that parasocial relationship is not healthy for either person. And so taking the speakers and putting them in groups and having them speak, even if it's just to 9 people or 7 other people, where they're required to be working at that level. Like, how healthy would it be for a Jordan Peterson to just be in an estuary group for 6 hours for a week, over a weekend, and just talk to people as if they're people, right? So I think it's a really brilliant format in that way. And I think that's really, really important in the kind of world that we live in. And of course, I think that the physical embodiment component is still something that could be brought up a lot more. And I was listening to Jordan speak with Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying this week about the event they're putting together, where they're going to try to get outside of the tyranny of the propositional by adding music and comedy. And it's like, that's a good idea, right? Music is really, really powerful. And Brett talked about the difference between live music and recorded music and how we don't think about this. But it's that difference between speaking live to a crowd and putting something pre-recorded out on YouTube. And so I think that that we're weaving together these ecologies of practice that are bringing us back to embodied community, which is, like I said, it's the thing we're all starved for. But it can also be pretty fatiguing to be a person at the nexus of it, I guess. That's my takeaways.
Nate, what stuck with you stands out?
Well, I pulled it off. So there's kind of a sense of relief that I managed it, and that it seemed to go fairly well. And then I've kind of on the ground from where I'm at, because I'm still in Olympia. I can see sort of some of the fruits from it starting to sprout up. We had 18 people at my local estuary meeting last night. We had to split up into 3 groups. There were 5 brand new people, and we have Bremerton is going to be starting an estuary soon. Noah, who was at the conference, is starting up an estuary in Bellingham. Both Paul and I are planning on going out to support the startup of the Bellingham estuary. I got my priest, Father Joe, who was at the conference, shared a text message with me last night. So Kara Stutheit, who was one of the conference attendees, her son is best friends with the sons of a priest in Vancouver, Washington, who is part of our diocese. And so he'd heard that Father Joe was there. And so he sent Father Joe a text. So Father Joe is totally going all in on hard selling him on estuary and why it's a good idea. And because he's been pretty involved in it here in Olympia, and he's seen the fruit that it bears, and he definitely wants to encourage this other priest to consider doing it in Vancouver. So estuaries are sprouting up all over the Pacific Northwest, and I'm helping to assist in that wherever I can. And I just sent some names to John Van Dock for people to add on to the ELSNet training distribution list, so that they can kind of get in and get a little bit of practice. And I sent them copies of the estuary training manual that the Estuary Leadership Council put together, so they kind of have that as a guideline. And so estuary is really starting to click, at least here. I was actually talking to my priest about this last night after our estuary. And I actually think that it's because the Northwest is so unchurched is one of the reasons estuary lands easily, because it seems safer, I think, for unchurched people to enter an estuary space than to just go directly to a church. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Paul.
So I've been doing a ton of thinking about this, and I found it difficult to put words on a lot of it. And that sort of connects me back to the little talk that I gave on stage in terms of trying to get a sense of the information that I gained in this conference that I can't put into listicles. With my Chris Green conversation a while ago, where we always sort of want to take something big and turn it into, 4 or 5 little points that are, mimetic and saleable. The overall impression that I have from the conference is just power. It was powerful. It was heavy, and heavy in terms of kavod. There was a lot of weight, that kind of glorious weight to it. And part of what makes this conference so interesting is that, generally speaking, at a conference which is primarily, as Rafe said, sort of, stage centric, there were, how many different estuary groups were there? 10? There are in some ways 10 different conferences that happened here. And the fact that the people stayed with the same estuary people the whole time means that, there's sort of the plenary session, and then there's the 10 estuary conferences that happened. And I'm still, I appreciate what Raj asked right at the end, which of course we could never do, but I'm just hearing little dribbles coming out of some of the other estuary groups that their time too was profound and healing and meaningful. At our Sunday estuary this week, we had 5 or 6 brand new visitors and completely disconnected from the conference. And it was, again, it gave me the sense of when it works, it's a gift, because the group went fine Sunday, but we had 15 people in the room, and that's really too many. And because we had so many visitors, I didn't feel confident splitting it up. Maybe I should have. So, and I'm anticipating what I'm going to do at Quinbrook Farms, my sister's place in Connecticut, in mid-October, where we'll have 15 people. And I'm thinking about how to structure that. I didn't want to cap the group at 8. That would be too small. And so, yeah. So I guess overall, on one hand, it was a time when I think God moved powerfully among the people that gathered. And I also, as I told my group the last day, towards the end of something like this, there's always the movement to, it's sort of an idolatrous movement where you say, okay, this happened. It was really important. It was really healing. It was really meaningful. How can we turn it into the product of a machine? Let's create the machine so this always happens for us. And that's idolatrous. And I said, when this happens, it is a gift that you should receive with gratitude. And it's absolutely okay to hunger and thirst and long for that gift to be given again. But don't turn it into the product of a machine, because then you will create an idol, and that idol will harm. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Anyone want to respond to anything that someone said?
Oh, so that was round 2. Now we're going to round 3.
I'm just going to grab. I'm overheated, so I'm going to turn the heat off.
No, I just wanted to. I really appreciate what the last thing that Paul just said about receiving it as a gift and not wanting to turn it into a product. And you definitely don't want to get into this frame of thinking that every conference should be like this one was, because they won't be, because different people are organizing them that have that will have different ideas, and what's important is to go with an openness to see whatever the next one reveals itself to be. So there'll be, I know, Dave Williams is starting to actually get a little bit more pinned down on this. He's wanting to do one in North Carolina and Appalachia, right in Jordan Hall's backyard, actually, because it would be in the Asheville area. And he wants to do it. He wants to be at a primarily outdoor event. At first, he didn't want to have speakers at all. He's open to the idea of speakers. So I'm going to help recruit speakers for him. He invited me to come and speak, and health willing, I will definitely do that. And health willing, I will also, since it's going to be in the mountains of North Carolina, and he says he knows plenty of rednecks who will let me do it on their property, I'm also going to cook a pig. So,
wow, that'll get people there.
Which I've done many times. So, and actually I like to cook them the Carolina style anyway. Cinder block pit, burn down the wood to coals, shovel it in.
I'll pick up on the same theme within what Paul said. With the events that we teach, we do 5-day events in the fall and spring, and an 8-day event in the summer. And people are like, how do we have this, right? And I always try to tell people it's a kind of temporary utopia. It takes an enormous amount of work to produce the conditions that allow whatever flowers to flower, and it's not sustainable as a daily sort of experience of life. Sort of like, you wouldn't expect that your wedding day would be the way that your marriage was every day. So you have to recognize that it opens up and kind of and it helps. I think it helps map people's hunger for things that they're really missing. But there needs to be an understanding that it's not the same. It's not possible as a continuous thing. And also that it's really contingent on what people bring, right? Like, if I was to come back and speak next year, it's going to be a very different kind of talk, because what's present for me hopefully is not going to be the same stuff, right? I don't want to come back next year and be like, oh, I just separated from my wife for 4 more months. We got back together. That would be a bad thing if that's the same story. Right?
Definitely don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So we say at the end of our events, like, this group of people is never going to be together again. And even if we were all come together, we still wouldn't be the same, because we'd all be different people by the time we came back together. And so that I think that actually makes these things more precious when we allow that to be true, and it helps us not attach to the wrong thing that can potentially mislead us.
That is all true, and I agree completely. Can you guys hear me? I'll say it if you guys are receiving this. I just want to say that's totally true, and I was, very aware, even as the conference was. Can you guys not hear me? I said something super profound, and you guys missed it. All right, I'll say it, and hopefully it'll be on the recording, and then I'll stop. Which is that it's true that you can't. I was very aware of not wanting to be like Peter on the mountain. Like, you have this vision that's blowing your mind away, and like you want to keep it. Should I build some tents? And Jesus is like, you don't even know what you're talking about. And like, I know you can't hang on to it. Just nod your head like you can hear me and you're following. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, Rafe is right. The conditions, now everybody's gone. This will be my last one, then I'll stop. The conditions have to be that, you can't, your life is not a conference where the entire day, all there is for you to do is talk. I've noticed coming back. But at the same time, the big impression that I got was like this renewed openness to other people. Like I could see them in a way I hadn't been able to before. And, waiting at the Seattle airport at 5:30 in the morning, Joy and I, we're just looking around, and it was like, it seemed as if all there was groups of 2 or 3 people having estuaries. It's like estuaries everywhere. That's what it seemed like, where people just quietly talking and quietly listening to each other. And that impression of everywhere there's a conversation that could be had if I'm just open to another, the other person, that has remained for me. And so I think there's a way in which, the conditions aren't going to be like this every time. And also, it's true that the deep conversation, I think the estuary format proves that you can take anybody and just have the format where you just listen to each other and the infinite human depths open up. So it's, in a way, it's accessible in every moment of every day. Okay, now everybody nod your heads. All right, I'll stop.
It's like listening to Spanish language radio for me. I get about 60%.
Okay, I'm going to listen for the rest of this, and I'll nod my head.
Just like as a potential technical solution, if your Wi-Fi is really unstable, could you log in via your phone? Your phone might have better reception than your Wi-Fi.
Let me show you my phone, Rafe.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I admire that.
Yeah,
so.
I probably could.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Graham's out there in the woods. He needs Starlink.
Yeah. Come on, Elon Musk, come save the day.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this, and we'll go with you, Rafe. The presentations, while they weren't, like, it seems like the estuary sessions were really the thing that made this conference hum. The presentations set the tone and gave something for the estuary groups to talk about. And I'm curious how you think your presentation went, and how the response was to it.
Yeah, I thought it went really well. It was I knew that I was kind of tapped into a pretty deep emotional well, and that it was going to likely land, and it seemed like it really did land. And many people came up to me and asked me afterwards about it, and spoke to me about how meaningful it was. And so I felt really pleased with the impact of what I had to offer. And I do think that, I was just sort of saying that the top down is not sufficient, but I do think it's a necessary component, right? Like, I think that sometimes we can become too egalitarian, and we can not recognize that people in some sense need aspiration, and they need central figures to organize around. And some people do, have particular talents that work to do it. It's like Jordan Peterson often talks about the analogy of a basketball team, right? It's like you want your best player to take most of the shots, and if you try to have a perfectly even distribution of shots, it's not going to be less effective than if you have one player. Now, a team can also fail because that player becomes too selfish, and because they don't use the power of their manipulation to then open opportunities for other people. But there's a real value to having those moments when everyone could come together and see one thing presented. And then they all have had the same experience. And if that person's a really experienced and powerful speaker, they're going to move those people. And we're going to open up a conversation that then can carry forward and impact other things. And so I think that component of it's actually really, really important. And I think it's a responsibility that deserves a lot of seriousness when you understand how powerful that is, like that people consent in some sense to let you move their soul for 20 minutes. It's like, okay, take it seriously.
I'd like to try to have Graham just say something real quick about his presentation and how you think it was received. We may not be able to hear you on our end, but it'll be in the recording.
Well, there's some people in the front row freaking out as I spoke. So that's good. Some strong reactions. To me, the worst possible outcome would be no reaction at all. I hope I either upset people or made people curious, provoked some curiosity, maybe a little agitation. Michael Martin came up and gave me a hug and said, "You're my soul brother." So that, so that made me, I think it landed with some people. I think it was mystifying to others. Overall, the impression that I got was this was the crowd that I wanted to bring my questions to. And I said at the beginning that, for reasons of style, I'll make it sound like I know what I'm talking about, but really what I intend for it is to be one question. And so I asked my question, and I think a lot of people have the same question. I think we're asking that question in a lot of different ways. I was really not, Rafe, you talked about, your whole thing is, about getting back to the body, and joyful movement. And you talked about your encounter at the waterfall, and you're approaching this whole thing that a lot of people are coming into from a lot of different directions, but your direction is, in the body. And, and that's what I'm trying to do too. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. But it was kind of also like, okay, but and then what do we do now? And that's that's where I'm at. What do we do now?
What do we do now?
That's the big question. We're having these realizations about the body and floating away in the left mind,
just respond,
needing to get back.
Really,
what do we do? Sorry, I missed that.
Sorry, I don't know if I interrupted him when he was actually talking.
I think you're good, Rafe. Go ahead.
No, I really appreciate the poetry, and I thought it spoke so powerfully to that idea of the sensuous and embodied relationship to the divine, and also how that has been lost and how necessary it is to reclaim. And so I felt reciprocally an immense resonance with what you were speaking to. And so that was really cool.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ray.
Paul, how did?
Go
ahead. Let me talk about Graham's presentation first, because I've got probably an unusual burden here in that a lot of these conferences we're having in Christian Reformed churches. The percentage of people that watch my channel who are Christian Reformed, it's small, but it's not insignificant. And Graham's talk was the kind of talk that is going to make some people say, should we let Christian Reformed churches be used for this kind of thing? And so I haven't posted Graham's talk yet, and I'm trying because I'm gonna. And I actually, in thinking about your talk, I actually decided to put a front end on all the talks, because all the talks are out there now in terms of the corner and everybody can see them. But I really appreciated your talk because I thought you said a lot of things that I hear, but people never have the guts to say them in church. And that, not that anything and everything should be said in church, but I thought what you said really needs to be heard by the church. And too often it isn't. And so I was deeply moved by your talk. And again, many of the elements I've heard spoken by people quietly to me, maybe in my office, which is a very appropriate place. But I think the church needs to hear many of the things you had to say to really think about it. Because what a lot of what I took from your talk was, kind of this is don't let the church has to keep its eye on the machine. In this age, we will have machines, but so often, and this is, I think, very true of everything post Reformation, where we so want to have, again, it's all about idolatry. And I thought your talk was really a cry against idolatry. And too often, and then we lost him. Too often in churches, we get comfortable with certain very churchy idols, and so I really saw his talk as a cleansing challenge for what so easily captures churches. And I think it's those capturings that then destroy the church and lends to part of the reason we see churches in these cycles of being born, sort of getting very big, very popular, very successful, and then crashing because at some point, so during the seeker movement in the 80s and 90s, Bill Hybels, Rick Warren, this movement which totally remade many churches in the West, and churches were very large. There was a lot of evangelism going on. A lot of good stuff happened. And I remember Willow Creek then saying, okay, we've captured the boomers, now on to the millennials. And so they tried to do exactly what they did, take the formula they used for the boomers and apply it to the millennials, and it was a complete disaster. Or the Xers, actually. It was a complete disaster because the Xers at that point, they were the ex-evangelicals, because they were like, I cannot tolerate this seeker church stuff. It is a machine, and it is churning up people. So I really appreciate it. I really saw Graham's talk as very anti-machine, and really should force, and especially his talk as an Orthodox person that is saying, because someone would say, yeah, Orthodoxy is so. Sorry, Graham, you haven't heard my whole talk about you, but it's on. You'll get to hear it, like we'll get to hear yours. His whole point is
I'll
like
watch it later.
he's speaking to this out of the Orthodox tradition, where he's saying there's this machine in Orthodoxy that has to be challenged. And I found it. I know some people are going to watch that and be angry, but I was deeply moved by it.
Yeah. I thought it came at just the right juncture in the conference. I thought too, and it served as a really good kind of bridge to what some of the things that came after. And I think I received it as mostly a question, but just honest questioning. And I think that I've talked to Graham afterwards a little bit about it. But I think it's just what I saw. It took it mostly in the spirit of let's not forget that this is about the marriage of heaven and earth, and we shouldn't forget the earth. And I think that there's a lot to be. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. And I think a lot. I think like in terms of like some of the philosophy, the Orthodox philosophy that Graham was critiquing. I don't think we always, when we hear some of that stuff from our own modern perspective, we hear that the way it sounds in the aftermath of Descartes. And I don't think that the sources that Graham is wrestling with necessarily would have been hostile to Graham's message of "don't forget the earth." I really don't. I think that we have this tendency to see anything that's influenced by Platonism as completely dualistic in the aftermath of Descartes, and to see spirit as something that is just like completely immaterial. But that's not actually how the ancients viewed those things. And we talked, and Graham and I had a little bit of a conversation about how that's reflected in the language. Obviously, I was drawing on Barfield a lot there, where you have in these ancient languages, you have this single unified meaning that is not absence of the sense of the earthly and the physical dimensions of that meaning. It's unified along with the higher meaning together. So.
Was it just me, or did Nate get really broken up there too?
It was you, because you started freezing.
Okay. We're cursed.
Maybe this is a direction we can go. Matthew Pajot put out a video, and one of the things he said that was interesting is we have the answer. The answer is Jesus, but we forgot the question. And I'm trying to rediscover the question that he answers. And so I guess what I would ask you guys, do you think Estuary is trying to rediscover the question? If that makes sense, Rafe. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I'm using a lot of inside baseball here.
Yes. It's funny, like, I guess I'm both the embodiment guy, right, in the corner, and I'm also like a very rational person who has a really sort of hypertrophied propositional mind, and I'm not sure how exactly that's played out or why it's played out the way that it has, but like, it's interesting to me. I feel like in some ways, like my journey and Jordan Hall's are kind of in parallel, right? Like we're kind of coming to Christianity at around the same time, influenced by similar people, both very good friends with John Vervaeke and influenced by him. And maybe it's also where I'm at in my life, whereas he's at in his life. He's, a bit further down the rabbit hole of life and financial establishment and everything. But, like he's apparently like read every theology book out there, or some very large percentage of them, and he's got extremely tight philosophical reasoning behind his conversion, and I find myself sort of not wanting to do that yet, right? Like I can lay out an argument for why Christianity is really virtuous. From a historical perspective, I can, like, I sat down with some friends recently. I was like, here's why I'm not a Buddhist. Here's why I'm not a Muslim. Here's why I'm not a Jew. And here's why I'm choosing Christianity. And it's not that I don't see value or virtue in all of those traditions, but there's something specific. And it's not, to me, they're not the same. It's not all, paths to the mountaintop, right? But I recognize that my left brain in some sense is doing this thing. And then there's this other thing that's been happening, which is actually the main reason that I've converted. And I don't really understand that. And I don't really want to try too much right away. Like I want to feel it. I want to feel what that means. And then I can play this game where it's like, I felt Christ in me, right? It's like, John is like, well, why are you a Christian? It's like, well, I mean, Buddha's never come and hung out with me. I mean, that's like it's kind of a silly answer because, like, my left brain's like, well, duh, you're raised in a Christian culture, you're influenced by Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, Paul Vanderklay, Jordan Hall, whatever, right? Like, so yeah, it makes sense that it's not Buddha in my particular context, but nonetheless, that is my experience, right? And I'm rooting myself in my own sensed experience of the world right now, and that's sufficient for me. I don't have to feel like I have a definitive philosophical case for faith. I don't know that that's actually possible. But the thing that my rational capacities, they get like triggered by this whole experience. But here's what I keep going back to. I'm a better husband and a better father. So whether it makes perfect philosophical sense or if I can perfectly articulate, if I show up in faith and hope and love and I prioritize those virtues, it's mended the most important relationships in my life. And that doesn't mean that it's definitive and that there's no other traditions that can do the same thing. But that was the answer to a question that I was struggling with since I was a child, which was basically how to be, well, it's as simple as what is the good? What is the good? And what do I need to orient to move me in that direction? And how does it show up where it matters? Because I knew lots of spiritual people who were, filled with beautiful philosophy, who were terrible husbands and terrible fathers. So maybe that's helpful.
It's really good.
So let me take a crack at this. I think the kind of question that I think the reason that it's difficult to remember the question because that the question is it's a very intimate question, which makes it hard to bring into the into apprehension. So it's the kind of question that you can't that is so deep you can't even articulate it. So if we are trying to the way to remember it, and actually I think this is where Rafe's approach here is instructive, right? Because if we're trying to remember it, I think it has to be in a very embodied way. And it's not necessarily with our head that we're going to be able to come into cognizance of this question. And I think we'll see the question and the answer at the same time. And I think that's probably, I think that Rafe was taking that as approach. That's probably why he had such the deep, profound experience that he did. That is it's not really something that is easy to rationally explain. But I think the experience that you shared with us at the conference, to me, that you shared the experience of somebody coming into a place where they're able to sense the question and the answer. And just because, and it's done at a level where there's absolutely no guarantee that you'll be able to articulate it in your speech. For one thing, it's it is the word, right? It is the word, and because the word is a living word, it will take different shapes at different times and different interactions and different relationships, and so there needs to be the openness to that. And the minute you try to fix it and just say this is it, I think Machida frames it that way because he understands this. I think so. I think that's why he framed it that way. So yeah.
I mean, to invoke the Taoists, right? The way that can be spoken is not the eternal way, right? And my favorite presentation from ARC when I went to the Association for Responsible Citizenship was Jonathan Pajot talking about the highest good is always ineffable, right?
Yeah.
And the tendency of idolatry is to find a local good that's more articulable and make it the highest good.
Yeah.
Because at least it's articulable, right?
Right. Yeah.
And something about I think that's something about how I'm holding this is this sense of like trying to have a definitiveness or to foreclose the whole conversation in my rational mind feels like the wrong thing to do.
Right. No, I think this relates to a thread that Paul keeps returning to again and again lately, that came out of his conversation with Chris Green, where Chris was talking about how in our society we award people who are able to take complexity and render it down into simple and simplify it, and we call them experts and we celebrate them, and that this is actually precisely the opposite of what we need to do. And we need to stare the complexity in the face. I actually had an experience in my estuary. One of the new people that came to estuary last night was a man with cerebral palsy, and he was very it was the first time he was there, but he was very open with the group and talking about the way he gets treated as a person with disability, where people just they'll be overly friendly and try to make themselves feel like good people, and they'll just say these really trite things, and he talked specifically about how his experience with Pentecostals was among the worst, because they would be like, well, why aren't you healed already? I kind of start to blame him. And it's and it was just like a really good wake up call, because it's and fortunately nobody in our group actually tried to give any easy answer to what he's putting out there. They actually listened, sat with it. And that's the only thing you can do when in the face of real serious suffering, is you just have to be willing to face it, hold somebody's hand and listen to them. I mean, so.
I was struck recently by my youngest daughter was really sick. Not super sick. She was puking. She spent the whole day puking. And
yeah, but as a parent, that's just you're worried, right?
Yeah,
constantly. So
maybe.
Yeah, I did. My son had asthma as a child, and I had really severe childhood asthma. So every time my son would have an asthma attack, I was freaking out.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was puking. I've had a lot of stomach issues throughout my life, and so I've puked a lot, and it's a pretty unpleasant experience. So she was puking, and I was kind of I was looking at my phone, right? And I put my phone down, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be here in this moment with her. And I noticed that the experience of actually empathizing with her as she was in the act of puking was incredibly overwhelming for me. It was really, really hard to just actually empathize. And I've noticed this pattern, which is that empathy can actually be really, really uncomfortable. And that often we try to fix people's problems, not because we want to help them, but because we don't want to feel empathy for what they're feeling anymore. And I know that that's one of the probably most destructive things that I did in my relationship with my wife, was habitually move to that place where instead of receiving empathy, she received rationality, motivated rationalizations to remove my burden of having to feel empathy for her pain. And so what shifted a lot as we healed our relationship was that I just sat with her for 2 hours every night and just was okay with her not feeling good. I just told her over and over again, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And that's a one thing that came out of my conversation with Jordan Hall that really, really stuck with me was this idea that pistis, faith, is an embodied capacity. And, that's what I was really like referring to, I think. But this idea that like by making it creedal, by making it propositional, we've like missed something really, really important, which is that like if you don't have it, if it's not physically built in you, if you don't have the capacity, you can't really express it, right? You can't do it. And there is a relationship between the kind of faith that allows you to lift a heavy weight or make it through a sparring round or do a jump at height, and the kind of faith that allows you to feel in your body really intense experiences of empathy and not freak out and not disassociate. And I think so much of what we do is just disassociate from what our body's telling us because it's too intense. And when we can,
No, you're 100% right, Rafe. And it is very tempting to turn away or to rationalize or to fix it or whatever. And that is the face of Christ that we're turning away from when we turn away in those moments. And when we want to be able to like remedy it or whatever in order to be able to turn our attention elsewhere, that refusal to attend to that is a refusal of the face of Christ because it convicts us.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, like I keep going back to this thing. Like my oldest daughter is like very staunch atheist right now. And I'm like, I don't feel a need to be certain about anything that happens after death. Right. I choose to have faith. Right. Like I want to believe that Beth's father, that he is going through his fire so that he can cleanse himself, and that he'll be there when she passes as his highest self, and that she'll be able to meet him and as he might have been. But it doesn't need to be, for me, it doesn't need to be true in that sense for it to be eminently true in the sense that we experience it all the time. Right? In that capacity to sit with somebody in the depths of their pain and to allow yourself to feel it and to operate from the place that you feel it is, in some sense, the capacity to harrow hell. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's the exemplar that Christ offers us. And that is redeeming. Right? It's just like whatever you want to say about what happens after death, it's redeeming right here, right now.
Yeah.
Right? And it's what, it's so hard, right? It's so hard. It's such a call to extraordinary courage, right? Like I think about this a lot, like the idea, my parents came out of the hippie generation. There was something beautiful about the aspirations of that generation, but somehow a lot of it fell to deep corruption, and really it was weak, and I think a lot of it was like this idea that love is niceness.
Yeah.
That love is pleasant feelings, that love is like, like if you're not like vibing in that moment, then you're not in the love, right? And you're not a light warrior. And it's like, that's not how it works at all. Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of the critics of my channel who call me a love idolater, that's the valence that they hear when I say love. That valence that you're talking about, that's what they're hearing, I think. But that's not what I mean. So, yeah.
No, I think that really loving is the most courageous thing that you can possibly do, because it I remember when my daughter was born, my oldest daughter, right? And I held her in my arms, and she had stopped growing in utero at 33 weeks. And so they had to get her out at 36 weeks, and there was an induced labor and then an emergency C-section. And so I finally am holding my daughter, and she's got no body fat on her, right? she's like tiny, and I just had this experience of like, this is the most precious human being in the world to me, and she's incredibly delicate, and like I'm terrified, absolutely terrified, because she could die at any moment so easily. Everything can kill her. And that sense of like the to love in a sense like that, it's not just nice, right?
Right.
Like it's to take up a burden, a terrifying burden when you really look in the face of it. And that's a very different thing than like, taking some ecstasy and having a cuddle puddle at Burning Man, right? It's not the
same. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if I've ever I've been in a live stream when someone said taking ecstasy and having a cuddle puddle at Burning Man. That's a first for me.
Yeah, it's a brand new one.
Does it come up in the CRC a lot?
Not a lot. I don't think I've ever heard about a cuddle puddle. So there we go.
Oh, dude, there's a lot of cuddle puddling in my circles.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going an hour. I didn't know how much time everyone has. Did everyone have another 20 minutes, 25 minutes?
I can do 20.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I don't necessarily have a direction.
Well, I'll talk about the lock and the lock and the key, because I thought, listening to Matthew Pajot, it's so interesting, knowing that he's Jonathan's brother, and you just imagine, before Jonathan was famous, these two just sort of talking back and forth, working out this stuff. And then of course, I actually approached Matthew once. I said, Matthew, I'd love to do it. I just want to hear your story from you. And I don't like doing interviews. It's like, all right, no problem. But then just to hear him, just to hear how his mind works and how he goes in and out and the things he says, I really enjoyed it. But then, like, it's the second part of that video where he talks about this imagery, and I thought, oh wow, that really speaks to me. Again, back to in all the zeal that Christians have in their evangelistic religion, they keep trying to turn Jesus from a person into a machine. And they keep trying to, okay, Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross. We'll take it from here. And here we've got the sinner's prayer, and here we've got the 4 spiritual laws, and here we have the Roman road. And if we can and here we have the seeker, 7 steps, or Rick Warren had his bases, or now, every new successful iteration produces its own idolatry. And I thought that Matthew's imagery there was so perfect, because all of the idolatries seem to hold the same key. Well, Jesus is the reason for the season. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. The correct answer to every Sunday school question is Jesus. But the lock gets forgotten. And part of what happens in the world, and especially been happening in the last 500 years, accelerating change with increasing technological disruption, is that we keep coming up with new locks, and you can hear it in the estuary. I love I love the image of, Lord willing, maybe this will happen. We're going to get Jordan Peterson at an estuary conference at some point, and I think he'll do fabulously in the groups. He'll just have to go back to that therapist mode and listen, because we tend to, what you hear in the groups are so the latest thing in the corner, of course, has been the orthodoxy is the answer for the world today. And then I'm driving Graham and Michael from the airport into town, and Graham says something like, "Oh, he's just talking about his relationship with Orthodox, and he got there before the Orthobros, you just keep taking apart all of the ways." There's this great line in Flannery O'Connor. I should memorize the little passage because she states so beautifully, this one guy thought the best way to avoid Jesus was to avoid sin. And that if we can somehow have what Jesus gives us without having to deal with the terror and complexity and just discomfort that Jesus brings, we can all breathe a sigh of relief. We can have a Jesus-free salvation, because that's really what we'd like. Because, and it's so amazing where you read the Gospels, and even for Jesus' biggest fans, who are his disciples, who have left everything to follow him, sometimes they're just in terror of him. And he's always asking them questions that they can't answer. And he's always frustrating them. And again, I keep trying to remind people that they killed Jesus for a reason. It wasn't when Jesus came in the room, there was the smell of flowers and unicorns danced off clouds and sparkles came down. I mean, people who were killing each other paused killing each other in order to kill him. It was that disruptive to what we have. And yet at the same time, notorious sinners flocked to him, and the sinful woman bathed his feet when the group of Pharisees who had invited him to the party for whatever reason decided to snub him via normal standards of hospitality. So, and I think in any real church, that living Jesus is there. And, so then you have the brothers Karamazov, and Jesus shows up, and this guy again. I mean, we keep trying to distill him. Let's can we put Jesus in a squeezer and squeeze the salvation out of him so we can bottle it and formulate it? And by the way, we're really going to make a lot of money if we can really synthesize the salvation juice so that we can deploy it according to the terms we feel comfortable with. And that's where the lock goes missing. And in an estuary group, when you're sitting and listening for hours at a time, and I mean really listening to the modes of complex locks that this painful world has bound people with. And you as a pastor realize, I can't undo this lock. It's exactly what Rafe was talking about. I can't free this person. I would love to have, Jesus fill me with the Holy Spirit and, give the blind man sight and give the lame man, mobility. But the kinds of locks in this world, they're so devilish. And so you wind up, as Nate said, sitting and listening, and you just have open hands and you say, if I've had a part in making your lock even worse, I'm sorry. I probably did if you've been around me long enough. I do believe that Jesus is the key, but I can't wield him to open your lock. So I am just going to sit and I am going to pray, and I will, to whatever degree I have capacity for, and my Dunbar number has capacity for, I will try to be your friend and serve you to the degree that I can, and trust that the key can even open this lock that you have presented me with.
Well said, Paul.
There's something there that I wanted to pick up on, slightly different, more psychological, less spiritual, because that's where I'm comfortable, I guess. But I think about the idea of sin a fair amount, because it feels like in a culture that has a that has sort of rejected the whole idea of sin. In some sense, it's like we can't see the light without the shadow, right? We've sort of rejected the dimensionality of good and evil. And in rejecting that, I think we're deluded. And yet I also am very sensitive to the sense that the way that we've talked about sin in the past has shamed people in ways that that really constrain people, and made them really miserable, right? Like John Vervaeke has talked about his experience of growing up in the evangelical church and how terrifying that was. And I think about sexuality, like I grew up in the hippie community. I'm glad I can talk about sex. I'm glad I can be honest about sexual desire. And I also think that a world with puff daddies is a pretty terrifying world too. And that we don't really have a good story for why that kind of behavior is wrong. Right. So I think about how do we sort of think about sin in a more sophisticated meta-modern way, or whatever kind of framework you want to throw at it. But that idea that Jordan introduced, the sin just means to error, right? It's like, okay, well, yeah, we're all going to make errors. In fact, every developmental process is error prone. And in fact, you can't develop without error. Error is a source of knowledge. One of the big things we run into in like motor learning theory is this idea that the old sort of motor learning theory, top-down information processing, gives us this idea of perfect practice makes perfect. So every time that you see someone error in practice, you need to immediately correct it, right? Because they're going to ingrain that habit. But actually, error is information that the system uses to then identify what works. And so you want a messier, more error-prone developmental process often if you want a really robust solution to being able to solve a movement problem. And so I think about that, and I think about the difference between the kind of sin that we all have to do versus the type of sins that we actually really want to avoid, that we don't want to have to repeat those sins, right? I was a victim of child sexual abuse, right? I don't want to have to learn that lesson again by passing it on to the next generation. Now, at the same time, it's like if I try to, I've played with like in my life, because of what I experienced, I was very closed off sexually, right? My wife is my only partner, and I'm very happy about that. But at the same time, the degree to which I closed myself off made it very hard for me to emotionally connect with and empathize with women in general. And so there's a stage in my development where I had to open my capacity to allow a frisson of erotic attraction in relationship to women. And there was a point at which that did threaten my relationship with my wife, right? And I was like, oh, that's too far. I have to bring it back. I erred, but I had to find that balance. And trying to close myself off completely from any level of sin actually made me a less virtuous person. Weirdly, right? It was like I had to go to the edge of it to say, no, I don't want that at all. And then I could see the good, right? It was like once I had just enough exposure to the shadow, I could see with clarity that everything that I wanted was within my relationship with my wife, and I could devote myself to that. And so I don't really have an answer to this, but I'm proposing this as a question, like how do we think about sin not as we are all sinners, right? And part of, I think, what you're talking about with Christ, what makes him so terrifying is that he is the light that reveals your sinfulness. And that is inherently, like, to quote Jordan Peterson, every ideal is a judge. So if you erect an ideal that's high enough, the ideal that is the highest and most transcendent ideal, of course it's going to be terrifying. So again, I find myself sort of like having said some things that feel like they were pretty cool, and then there's no summary at the end, and I don't know exactly what you're supposed to do with it. But there you go.
There are YouTube channels for this. You can do this on YouTube. You just keep talking and talking, and the end it's like, oh, this is what I mean.
It's funny. It's like I think there are lots of different approaches to thinking about sin, but I'm going to make Paul very happy here. It's interesting. God definitely has a sense of humor. I think most people are going to be watching this. They kind of know what my theology is, but my son was talking to me recently, and we're Anglican, but he leans way more into the Reformed part of the tradition than I do. And he was saying to me that he finds the doctrine of total depravity comforting because it assures him that he's not worse than anybody else. And so, it's interesting on two things. First of all, he's forcing me to look at something in a different light, and he's also showing to me that people are wired differently and need to hear things in different registers in order to connect to it. And it's interesting because my intuitive assumption is like someone who suffers from low self-esteem would actually find that like harder and worse. But his like as someone who is like he's very prone to low self-esteem, negative self-talk. No, he actually found that comforting. So there you go. So
it's interesting. Maybe my son will be a Calvinist.
There are worse things he could be. There are worse things.
I wonder if we could take a minute and we've done a bunch of reflecting on the conference and maybe look forward into the future. Any thoughts you have for the future of these types of conferences, the future of estuary in general? I'll just open the floor.
One thing I noticed was that when you do the first, like in the estuary protocol, right? Everyone puts an idea on the table. I noticed that sometimes the ideas that were put on the table were actually very difficult to assess as ideas, right? People would sort of just stream of conscious, and there was no, it was actually like, I don't know exactly what was proposed. And so one tool that I think would be helpful with that is a tool from circling or authentic relating called paraphrasing, where you repeat back what you heard to somebody. And so I think it would be interesting to do like a round in between the second and third, where before you vote, you actually try to get everyone to agree on what the proposals were. Right? So you can speak it back. So I could say, Paul, what I heard you say was blah, 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 blah. So I think what you're proposing is, and then you could say, yeah, that is what I was proposing. Or you could be like, no, Rafe, you're out of your mind. What I was actually proposing is. And I think this would help get some clarity in that. And I think that might be useful. So I think there's some tools from circling that would be an interesting cross-pollination. And then I think, the physical stuff that I brought and, I think, yeah. One thing that Guy Sengstock and Kyle Koch kind of discovered. Kyle's one of my students who did an event, EMP event, but Guy came from circling, was that doing it around a campfire completely changes it. So I think these things about connecting to nature, like just have it outside, do it around a campfire, like integrate it into these natural rhythms and these connections to nature. I think that would be really powerful. For me, sitting in that particular kind of church felt a little like a very artificial environment. And there was something about that is disembodying for me. So those are a couple things that I think could empower it.
My estuary was in the kids' play place, so we had lots. The environment was conducive.
Nice, that's good. Playfulness is a powerful virtue.
Yeah, I think that's great, Rafe, and I think we have at least one estuary conference that's being planned that is actually headed in that direction. That is intending to be an outdoor event.
Yeah, that's the Asheville
So,
one, right?
yep, the one that's going to be near Asheville. Yeah.
I'm trying to so I just finished the third seasons of Clarkson's Farm, and so you watch Jeremy Clarkson try to be a farmer. It's hilarious because he's not much of a farmer because animals don't go the way cars go. And when I think about my life and how God has to corral me, I'm like a really bad sheep because God just usually corrals me by I'm thinking I want to go here and there's a wall. Nope, not there. No, then I want to go over here. Nope, not there. And so I think he's sort of corralling living stones as options diminish. And one of the things I've been thinking about is what if we, as a church, did regular estuary conferences. And as I've watched the evolution of the estuary conferences, as I've watched that evolution, I learned I think Olympia was a big leap forward in terms of pulling back from the stage and leaning into the smaller estuary breakout groups. And it's really helpful for Living Stones because I don't have a big I don't have a big room for speakers, but I have lots of spaces for breakouts, and we actually have a fair amount of outdoor space too. Not very pretty. And if I do camping and the city complains, I've had people camping on this site for years, my friends, and you never had a problem. Just because Grim Grizz puts up a tent, now suddenly you have an issue. So I think about that. But part of for me what happened when Sunday school, which I dearly loved, it was like I got to land the plane on Sunday school. Maybe we'll do estuary every week. And the every week rhythm of estuary has been profound for me. And then I'm thinking, okay, this is a Protestant church, and so it's preaching of the word, preaching of the word, preaching of the word. What if I don't even know the rhythm we will have for these conferences or quite how to arrange them or who to bring in? Because I think on one hand, I do want to keep bringing in people who are both from the corner, some who are corner adjacent, and then some who are sort of the corner listens to, who they might want to hear sort of brought in. And again, if we did a conference, part of the reason you want to charge for these is so that you can get someone. I mean, part of me lately, it's like, I would love to have Brett Weinstein in the building and really start to drill down on some of these things, and get Jordan Peterson into. Here are 8 people that you're going to be with for 8 hours over the next 3 days, and if I hear word that you're talking the whole time, I'm going to pull you out of that group, my friend. So I'm just thinking about, okay, what are some of the next evolutionary leaps for this movement, and how does it? Again, my constant thing is, how does this relate to the church? And I don't know, but we're sort of feeling our way through that. And so that's, if anybody's praying out there, pray for this, that we'll find the next things for the development of this, for the healing of the world.
Since Graham was cutting in and out, he wrote a note. He says, since I'm in and out in the future, he wants bonfires, circles with everyone holding hands, barefoot in the grass, and all estuaries outside.
Rule maker here. All estuaries outside. Indoor estuary isn't real estuary.
Nate, I'll give you the last word here before we land this plane.
Yeah. What was the question again? Sorry.
Looking towards the future.
Toward the future.
Yeah.
Well, I'll focus on what I know best, which is what's happening closest to me and around me. And at least in my neck of the woods, it looks like estuary has a bright future. And I think that in terms of what it means for the church, I don't know if I have an answer to that question, but I do know that I can see that it's having some kind of impact for sure. Like I know, like it's interesting and very strange and unpredictable impacts too. So, like for example, we have one of the guys in our local Olympia estuary who led one of the groups at the conference. His name is Tom. He's in his early 70s, and he kind of like is a kind of a mystic type. He does like centering prayer and all these different practices. And he was at one point in his life he was a Jehovah's Witness, and he comes now upstairs on Sundays, like to the church. And it's like he doesn't receive the sacrament. He crosses his arms and receives the blessing, but he's there. He's there, and so I think I think what estuary means to the church, if you really to press me on it, is that it is a slow burn kind of evangelism. And it really, I mean, it is. I mean, it's not, and actually, when you make it consciously in evangelism, it fails, and it will fail and it will fall flat. But as long as you just let it be natural, it really does. It does work. And it transforms people. And even if it doesn't bring them into the church, at least it brings them closer into relationship with people. And if you're coming closer to relationship with people, then you are growing closer to Christ, regardless of whether you enter the church or not. So let's leave it at that.
Good word, Nate. Well, thank you all for joining us. And I hope to see you guys all again in the future someday. So it was a pleasure meeting all of you in person, and the conference was great. So, all right.
Thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.